The obsidian chains that bound Zara Nightwhisper's wrists had been forged in the heart of a dying star, their dark metal designed to suppress even the most powerful magic. As she hung suspended above the chasm of eternal hunger, her violet eyes reflected the swirling aurora that danced across Umbreleth's perpetually twilight sky. The ethereal lights painted her pale skin in shades of emerald and sapphire, making her appear almost ghostly against the backdrop of her realm's signature darkness. Below her, the ancient void serpent stirred in its slumber, its massive coils shifting like tectonic plates as it sensed the approaching feast. The creature had not fed in 3 centuries, sustained only by the ambient magic that seeped from the realm's core. Today, it would taste flesh again, her flesh, seasoned with the forbidden magic she had dared to practice. Zara Nightwhisper. High Priestess Morrigan's voice echoed across the ceremonial platform, each syllable dripping with righteous condemnation. The ancient woman stood at the edge of the chasm, her midnight robes billowing around her skeletal frame like the wings of a carrion bird. Her silver hair, twisted into elaborate braids adorned with bone trinkets, caught the aurora's light and seemed to glow with its own malevolent energy. You stand accused of the highest heresy, practicing love magic between realms, corrupting the pure essence of Umbreleth with foreign emotions. Zara lifted her chin defiantly, though the movement sent fresh waves of pain through her shoulders, where the chains cut into her skin. Love is not corruption, she whispered, her voice barely audible above the wind that howled through the chasm. It is the most pure magic of all. The assembled crowd of shadow dwellers murmured their disapproval, their forms shifting like smoke. In the dim light, these were her people, beings of twilight and starshine, who had lived in harmony with darkness for millennia, yet none of them would meet her eyes now. They had come to witness her fall, to see justice served against one who had dared to love beyond the boundaries of their world. Morrigan's laugh was like glass breaking in the distance. Pure. Child, you opened your heart to a being from another dimension. You allowed foreign magic to course through your veins, contaminating generations of careful breeding. You have made yourself an abomination. The memories flooded back, unbidden, stolen moments in the space between worlds, where she had met him, Kieran, whose name she whispered now like a prayer. He had appeared to her first in dreams, then in the liminal spaces where dimensions touched. His magic was warm where hers was cool, bright where hers was shadow. Together, they had discovered that their powers didn't oppose each other but danced in perfect harmony, creating something entirely new. He taught me that magic has no borders, Zara said, raising her voice so all could hear. That love transcends the petty divisions we create between worlds. Our magic, when joined, could heal the rift that has kept our realms apart. For silence. Morrigan's staff struck the obsidian platform with a sound like thunder. The crystal embedded in its tip blazed with cold fire, casting harsh shadows that made her already gaunt features appear skeletal. You speak of healing, but you brought only contamination. The Council has felt the disturbance your liaison has caused in the magical frequencies of our realm. The very fabric of Umbreleth weakens because of your selfishness. Zara's heart clenched, not from pain, but from the crushing weight of responsibility. Could it be true? Had her love for Kieran somehow damaged her homeland? She thought of the strange aurora that had begun appearing more frequently. The way shadows seemed less substantial than before. The reports of minor dimensional tears appearing throughout the realm. The sentence stands, Morrigan continued, gesturing to the 2 hooded executioners who stood ready to release the chains. Death by consumption, that your tainted magic might feed the void serpent and strengthen the barriers between worlds. Let your fate serve as a warning to any who would follow in your footsteps. As the executioners stepped forward, their movements synchronized with centuries of practice. Zara closed her eyes and reached out with her senses one final time. Through the dimensional barriers that had grown so thin thanks to her forbidden courtship, she called out with every fiber of her being. Kieran. She whispered across the void between worlds. If you can hear me, if any part of what we shared was real, please remember me. The first executioner's hand touched the release mechanism of her left chain. Below, the void serpent's massive head rose from the depths, its eyes like twin galaxies swirling with hunger that had been building for 300 years. Its forked tongue, each tip the size of a building, tasted the air and found it rich, with magical potential. But as the chain began to loosen, something extraordinary happened. The aurora above them began to pulse in an entirely new pattern, the colors shifting from their natural greens and blues to brilliant golds and crimsons. The assembled crowd gasped as the very air around them began to shimmer, as if reality itself was becoming uncertain. High Priestess Morrigan's eyes widened in shock and fury. "Impossible," she hissed, raising her staff higher. "The barriers hold. The barriers must hold." The shimmering intensified, and suddenly the air in front of the platform tore like fabric. Through the rift stepped a figure that made the shadowed dwellers recoil in fear and wonder. He was tall and lean, with sun-kissed skin that seemed to glow with its own inner light. His hair was the color of burnished copper, and his eyes were the deep blue of an ocean under starlight, the exact complement to Zara's violet gaze. Kieran Stormright had crossed the dimensional divide, and the very presence of his magic in Umbreleth sent shockwaves through the assembled crowd. Where Zara's people were creatures of elegant shadows and whispered secrets, he blazed like a comet against the eternal twilight of their realm. "Let her go," he said, his voice carrying across the platform with quiet authority. Lightning crackled between his fingers, not the cold, blue-white electricity of storms, but warm, golden energy that seemed to pulse with life itself. Morrigan's face contorted with rage. "Abomination, your very presence here pollutes our sacred ritual. Guards, destroy this interloper." A dozen shadow warriors materialized from the darkness, their forms flowing like liquid night as they surrounded Kieran. Their weapons were forged from crystallized moonbeams, capable of cutting through both flesh and magic. But as they closed in, Kieran's magic erupted outward in a sphere of brilliant light. The shadow warriors shrieked as the warm light touched them, not destroying them but transforming them. For an instant, their true forms were revealed, not the monsters Morrigan had shaped them into, but beings of beauty and grace who had been twisted by centuries of darkness and isolation. "I'm not here to fight you," Kieran called out, his eyes locked on Zara's suspended form. "I'm here to offer you a choice. Continue down this path of isolation and watch your realm slowly fade into nothing, or embrace the possibility of something greater." Zara felt her heart soar as she looked upon him. Even bound by star-forged chains and dangling over a creature that could devour worlds, she had never felt safer. Through their magical connection, she could feel his determination, his love for her burning like a beacon across the dimensional divide. "You cannot have her," Morrigan snarled, raising her staff to channel the full power of Umbreleth's darkest magics. "She has been judged and found wanting. The law demands the law." Kieran interrupted, his magic flaring brighter. "Was written by those who feared change. But love, true love, recognizes no law but its own." He raised his hands, and golden light streamed from his fingertips toward the chains that bound Zara. Where his magic touched the star-forged metal, it began to sing a pure, clear note that rang out across the chasm like the voice of creation itself. The void serpent, which had been rising eagerly toward its promised meal, suddenly paused. Its ancient, alien intelligence could sense something it had never encountered before, magic that was neither of Umbreleth nor of any single realm, but something entirely new, something that made it afraid. As Kieran's light touched her bonds, Zara felt the chain's suppression falter. Her own magic, cool and silver as moonlight, rose to meet his warm radiance. Where their powers touched, reality rippled and transformed, creating something that had never existed before in any dimension. The chains began to crack, hairline fractures spreading across their surface as to magics that should have been incompatible instead proved they were two halves of a greater whole. The very platform beneath them groaned as the fundamental forces that shaped Umbreleth began to shift and change. Morrigan's scream of rage was lost in the sound of shattering metal. As Zara's bonds finally broke, she fell, but not toward the waiting maw of the void serpent. Kieran's magic caught her, cushioning her descent and drawing her toward him like a moth to flame. As their hands finally touched, the explosion of magical energy that erupted from their joining touch sent shockwaves through both their dimensions. The assembled crowd was thrown back by the force of it, and even the mighty void serpent retreated deeper into its chasm. recognizing a power greater than its ancient hunger. Standing together in the epicenter of the magical storm they had created, Zara and Kieran looked into each other's eyes and saw their future reflected their dangerous, uncertain, but blazing with possibility. Kieran Stormright had felt Zara's magical signature fade 3 days ago. A sensation like having half his soul suddenly go silent. For 72 hours, he had torn through the dimensional barriers with desperate fury, leaving a trail of cosmic storms in his wake as he searched for the pathway to Umbreleth. His world, Solaria, had watched in confusion as their most gifted dimensional mage abandoned his duties and disappeared into the void between realities. Now, standing in the heart of the Shadow Realm with Zara's trembling form pressed against his chest, Kieran understood that those 3 days of agony had been nothing compared to the torture of almost losing her forever. Through their joined hands, he could feel the echo of her pain, the despair she had carried as she faced death alone. "How?" Zara whispered against his shoulder, her voice muffled by the golden light that still surrounded them both. "The barriers between our worlds," Morrigan said, "they were absolute." Kieran's laugh was bitter as his eyes met those of the High Priestess, who stood frozen in shock at the edge of the platform. "Your Morrigan lied about many things. Beloved, the barriers aren't absolute, they're artificial, maintained by those who profit from keeping our people apart." The magical storm around them began to settle, but its effects were unmistakable. Where once the aurora of Umbreleth had displayed only cool blues and greens, now warm golden threads wove through the display like liquid sunlight. The very air seemed lighter, less oppressive, as if the realm itself was taking its first real breath in centuries. Morrigan's staff blazed as she channeled power from the ancient ley lines that crisscrossed Umbreleth. "You know nothing of our ways, outsider. The barriers protect us from contamination, from the chaos that mixing realms would bring." "Contamination?" Kieran's voice carried across the platform, and for the first time since his arrival, anger colored his tone. "I've spent the last 3 months in the archives of the Cosmic Library, reading the true history that your people have forgotten. Umbreleth and Solaria weren't always separate realms. We were one world once, before the Sundering, a collective." Gasp rippled through the assembled shadow dwellers. Even the Void Serpent's massive head emerged slightly from the chasm, its galaxy eyes fixed on Kieran with what might have been recognition. Zara pulled back to look at him, her violet eyes wide with shock. "That's impossible. The creation myths say." "The creation myths are lies," Kieran said gently, his hand cupping her face as golden light danced across her pale skin. "Careful lies, crafted to hide the truth. Our realms were split apart by those who feared what we could become together. The very reason you and I can weave magic as we do, it's because we're not from different species. We're two halves of the same people, separated by ambition and greed." High Priestess Morrigan's face had gone pale beneath her elaborate bone ornaments. "You speak heresy," she hissed, but there was fear in her voice now rather than righteous fury. "Even if such fantasies were true, it changes nothing. The separation has lasted for millennia. Our people have evolved differently. We are no longer compatible, aren't we?" Kieran asked, and suddenly his magic flared again, not the brilliant golden light of before, but something subtler. Images began to form in the air around them, scenes drawn from the dimensional memories that existed between worlds. The first image showed a world of impossible beauty, where beings of light and shadow danced together under skies that displayed both sun and aurora simultaneously. Children who bore both the pale elegance of the shadow dwellers and the warm radiance of the sun-touched played in gardens, where crystal flowers grew alongside golden fruit trees. "This was our world," Kieran said, his voice soft with wonder and loss. "Before the Council of Shadows and the Radiant Assembly decided that power was more important than unity." More images followed the great war that had torn the world apart, brother fighting sister as families chose sides, the terrible ritual that had split reality itself, creating two incomplete realms from one perfect whole, and finally, the barriers, not natural formations but massive magical constructs, designed to keep the severed halves of the world from healing. "The barriers require constant maintenance," Kieran continued, his eyes never leaving Morrigan's increasingly desperate face. "They're powered by the life force of both our peoples, slowly draining us generation by generation. Haven't you noticed how few children are born in Umbreleth now? How the shadows grow thinner each year?" Zara's hand tightened in his as understanding dawned. "The weakening of the realm. You said my magic was causing it, but it wasn't. The barriers are failing because they're killing us, and those in power would rather maintain their control over dying realms than risk losing their authority to a unified world," Kieran said, his gaze shifting to encompass the entire assembly. "They've convinced you that mixing our magics would destroy you when in truth, it's the only thing that can save you." Morrigan raised her staff higher, its crystal tip blazing with desperate fury. "Even if your lies contain some grain of truth, it matters not. I will not allow you to destroy everything our ancestors built." She began to chant in the old tongue, words of power that had been ancient when the world was young. The platform beneath them cracked as she drew power from the realm's core, preparing to unleash forces that would incinerate both Kieran and Zara where they stood. But as her magic built to a crescendo, something unexpected happened. The Shadow Dwellers, who had come to witness Zara's execution, began to change. The warm light that Kieran had brought to their realm wasn't destroying them as Morrigan claimed. It was awakening something that had been sleeping in their blood for generations. One by one, they began to glow, not with Kieran's golden radiance, but with their own unique light silver and blue and deep purple, the colors of twilight and starshine. And as their hidden luminescence awakened, their forms became more solid, more real, as if they were finally becoming their true selves. "Impossible," Morrigan breathed, her spell faltering as she saw her people transforming before her eyes. "The purity of shadow. You're destroying the purity." "There is no purity in incompleteness," said a new voice, and the crowd parted to reveal an ancient shadow dweller whose form flickered between darkness and light with each breath. Elder Thane was the oldest being in Umbreleth, so ancient that most believed him to be a myth. "I remember the time before, child. I remember what we lost." The elder's eyes, silver as starlight, fixed on Morrigan with the weight of millennia behind them. "I remember the lies we told ourselves to justify the sundering. I remember the children who died because half their heritage was stripped away. And I remember the prophecy." Morrigan's staff trembled in her grasp. "The prophecy is just legend. Old man, pretty stories to comfort those who cannot accept reality. The prophecy." Elder Thane continued, his voice growing stronger with each word, spoke of two souls who would carry the complete heritage of our people. One born to shadow, one born to light, who would find each other across the void and whose love would begin the healing of the world. Kieran felt Zara's intake of breath. As the elder's gaze fell upon them, the assembled crowd had fallen silent. Even the void serpent had gone still in its chasm, as if the ancient creature remembered truths that the younger generations had forgotten. "The signs are unmistakable," Elder Thane said, raising one withered hand toward the transformed aurora above. "The barriers weaken not because of contamination, but because they recognize the presence of those who can heal what was broken. The very realm calls out for reunification." "No." Morrigan's scream echoed across the platform as she raised her staff for a final, desperate attack. "I will not allow our people to be enslaved to sentiment and foolish dreams." But as she began to channel the last of her power, Zara stepped forward. The young sorceress, who had been condemned to death just moments before, now stood tall and proud, her magic intertwining with Kieran's in patterns that seemed to rewrite the very laws of reality. "You speak of enslavement, Morrigan," Zara said, her voice carrying new authority, "but you are the one who has chained our people to a dying realm. You are the one who has enslaved them to fear and isolation." The silver and violet light that surrounded Zara began to pulse in harmony with Kieran's golden radiance, and where their magics touched, new colors were born, hues that had no names because they had not existed for 1,000 years. "Stand down," Kieran said, his voice gentle but implacable. "You've lost, Morrigan. The people have seen the truth. The choice now is whether this transformation happens peacefully or—" He didn't need to finish the threat. Round the platform, the shadow dwellers continued to change, their awakening light growing brighter with each passing moment. They were remembering who they had been before the sundering, and with that memory came power that had been locked away for generations. Morrigan looked around at her people, at the faces that had once shown her nothing but reverence and now gazed upon her with suspicion and growing anger. She saw the truth in their eyes that given the choice between the slow death of their current existence and the uncertain promise of reunification, they would choose life. With a final, hate-filled glare at Kieran and Zara, she stepped back from the edge of the platform. "This is not over," she hissed. "There are others who remember the old ways." The dimensional rift that Kieran had torn open to reach Umbreleth was collapsing faster than either of them had anticipated as they stood together on the obsidian platform, surrounded by shadow dwellers whose awakening light grew brighter with each passing moment. The very air around them began to fracture like glass under pressure. "We have to go," Kieran said urgently, his eyes tracking the hairline cracks that were spreading through reality itself. "The barrier network is destabilizing. If we're caught between dimensions when it collapses, we'll be scattered across 1,000 realities," Zara finished, her magical senses already detecting the chaos building in the space between worlds. The knowledge came to her instinctively, as if their joined magic had unlocked memories that weren't entirely her own. Elder Thane stepped forward, his ancient form flickering more rapidly between shadow and light as the dimensional instabilities affected him. "Go, children," he said, pressing a small crystal pendant into Zara's hands. "This contains a fragment of the original world's memory. You'll need it to find the nexus point where the sundering began." "The nexus point?" Kieran asked, even as he began weaving the complex patterns necessary to open a stable portal through the collapsing barriers. "The heart of the original realm," Thane explained, his voice growing fainter as the dimensional storms intensified. "If the two halves of our world are to be rejoined, it must happen there. But beware, others know of its location and will do anything to prevent you from reaching it." Before either of them could ask more questions, the platform beneath their feet began to crack. The void serpent's song had grown louder, more urgent, as if the ancient creature was trying to warn them of some approaching catastrophe. Kieran's portal blazed to life, a swirling vortex of gold and silver light that seemed to exist in multiple dimensions simultaneously. "Now," he shouted over the sound of reality tearing apart around them. Hand in hand, they leaped into the dimensional gateway just as the ceremonial platform shattered completely. Behind them, they could hear Elder Thane's voice raised in song, adding his power to theirs as he helped stabilize their passage through the chaos. The space between dimensions was unlike anything Zara had ever experienced. She had glimpsed it before during her secret meetings with Kieran, but never like this, never while reality itself was coming apart at the seams. They tumbled through corridors of pure possibility, past fragments of worlds that might have been, through storms of raw creation that threatened to reshape them into something entirely new. "Hold tight to who you are," Kieran called out, his voice seeming to come from multiple directions at once. As the dimensional flux played tricks with sound and space, "Don't let the chaos change you." But even as he spoke, Zara could feel the boundaries of her identity becoming fluid. The pendant Elder Thane had given her pulsed with warm light against her chest, and through it, she began to see glimpses of memories that belonged to neither her present self nor any ancestor. She saw herself as a child with sun-golden hair, laughing as she played with shadow puppets that danced in the air around her. She saw Kieran with silver-streaked hair and eyes like starlight, wielding magic that was both radiant and dark. These weren't memories of who they had been, but who they might have been if the world had never been broken. "Kieran," she gasped, her voice strained by the effort of maintaining her sense of self in the dimensional maelstrom. "I'm seeing things, memories that aren't mine." "The pendant," he replied, his own form flickering between his current appearance and dozens of potential variations. "It's showing you echoes of the original timeline. Try to focus on them. They might be our guide to the nexus point." Before Zara could respond, the dimensional corridor around them suddenly stabilized, and they found themselves standing on a platform of crystallized starlight suspended in a void, filled with floating islands. Each island was a fragment of a different reality, and between them, bridges of solidified thought connected the pieces of broken worlds. The shattered realm. Kieran breathed, recognition dawning in his eyes. This is where the barriers were. First built the space between all possibilities. The islands around them were inhabited by beings that defied description, creatures that existed in multiple states simultaneously, their forms shifting between what was and what could be. Some appeared to be refugees from the Sundering, souls who had been caught between dimensions when the world was split, and had learned to survive in the spaces between realities. As they explored the nearest island, searching for clues to the Nexus Point's location, they encountered a figure that made them both stop in their tracks. She appeared to be a young woman, but her form flickered constantly between different versions of herself. Sometimes shadow pale like Zara, sometimes sun-bright like Kieran, sometimes something entirely other. Lost travelers, the figure said, her voice harmonizing with itself across multiple realities. You carry the scent of the true world upon you. It has been long since any have passed this way who remember what was lost. You know of the original realm? Zara asked. Stepping closer despite Kieran's warning hand on her arm, the figure smiled, the expression shifting across her many faces like ripples on water. I am Vera Time Weaver, and I am what your people might have become if the Sundering had never occurred. I exist in all possibilities simultaneously, remembering what was and seeing what might yet be. Then you know why we're here, Kieran said, his hand moving protectively to Zara's waist as he sensed something dangerous about this creature of living possibility. You seek the Nexus Point, Vera confirmed, her form solidifying into something more recognizably humanoid. You wish to undo the greatest tragedy in the history of consciousness itself. But do you understand the price? What price? Zara asked, though part of her already dreaded the answer. Vera's many selves spoke in unison, creating an eerie chorus effect to rejoin what was sundered. You must become the bridge between realities. Your individual selves will be dissolved into the greater pattern, your love transformed into the foundation upon which the new world rests. You will save everyone, but cease to exist as you are now. The words hit them like a physical blow. Kieran's arm tightened around Zara's waist, and she could feel his sudden fear through their magical connection, not fear of death, but fear of losing her, of their love being transformed into something impersonal and cosmic. There must be another way, Kieran said, his voice tight with controlled desperation. Perhaps, Vera replied, her form beginning to shift again. But such a path would require you to face the architects of the Sundering themselves, beings of such power that they shaped reality itself to their will, even if you succeeded in defeating them. The process of reunification would still require sacrifice before either of them could respond to this grim revelation. The peaceful atmosphere of the shattered realm was shattered by a sound like reality screaming. Across the void, several of the floating islands suddenly erupted in flames of pure darkness, and through the dimensional storms came a fleet of vessels that defied description. The covenant of separation, Vera hissed, her many forms suddenly aligning into a single, terrified expression. They have found you already. The ships were impossibly elegant constructions of crystallized despair and weaponized loneliness, their hulls reflecting not light, but the absence of possibility itself. As they drew closer, Zara could see their crew's beings who had chosen isolation over connection, power over love, and who saw the reunification of the realms as an existential threat to their carefully maintained order. You cannot run from us forever, children of prophecy, came a voice that seemed to emanate from the lead vessel itself. The speaker was neither male nor female, neither light nor shadow, but something that existed in the spaces between definition. Your very existence threatens the stability of all realities. Submit to dissolution, and we will make your ending swift, like hell, Kieran snarled, his magic flaring to life around them both. But as he prepared to fight, Zara caught his hand. Wait, she said, her eyes fixed on the pendant Elder Thane had given her. The crystal was blazing with such intensity that it was painful to look at directly, and through it, she could see something the others couldn't, a pattern in the chaos, a path through the storm of attacking vessels. The pendant, she whispered urgently. It's not just showing me memories, it's showing me the way forward. The Nexus Point. It's not a place, Kieran, it's a moment, a specific configuration of possibilities that only exists when certain conditions are met. Understanding dawned in his eyes as he followed her gaze to the pattern only she could see. The attack isn't random, he breathed. They're driving us towards something, toward the exact alignment of realities needed to access the Nexus. They think they're cornering us, Zara said, a fierce smile spreading across her face. But they're actually giving us exactly what we need. As the Covenant ships closed in around them, their weapons charging with the power to unmake entire dimensions, Zara and Kieran joined their magic once more. But this time, instead of fighting against the chaos, they embraced it, using the dimensional distortions created by the attacking fleet to tear open a pathway to something that existed beyond space and time. The portal that opened before them was not the swirling vortex